Welcome, everyone, to the Unger podcast. We have a very special guest today, Stephen Snyder. Stephen had a long career as a litigation attorney and also a mediator. But in addition to that, he is a meditation master, having studied extensively and practiced extensively in the Zen, Tibetan, and Theravada traditions. And he's the first non-monastic Western man to master the Shamatha meditation system of the Venerable Auk Sayadaaw. Stephen is also the author of several books, including Buddha's Heart, Stress Reduction for Lawyers, which is going to be apropos for this conversation, this Demystifying Awakening, and also his most recent, I believe, Trust and Awakening. So, Stephen, welcome to the podcast. It's great
Thank you,
having you.
Adam. Thank you, Adam. Really nice to be here with you.
Thank you. So, I just wanted to start off. It's just so cool to have someone. I'm a practicing attorney. I've worked in big law as a corporate attorney, and now a little bit in medium law, and I've experienced the stresses of being an attorney, and also started, really seriously uh, beginning a meditation practice in the Rinzai Zen tradition um, about 2 years ago. So when I came across, your books and your writings and your accomplishments as a meditator, but also having worked as an attorney and experienced the stresses of that job, I was just so curious about how those things intertwined and how having a job, like an attorney or a doctor or any job where you have a lot of stress can actually be integrated into your spiritual path and does not have to be necessarily separate from your awakening, which would seem like maybe two divergent things to someone on the face of it. So I just wanted to start the conversation with discussing your career as a litigator and as a mediator and a little bit of your background as an attorney, if you don't mind.
Sure, that sounds fine. Yes, in contrast to you, I never worked in big firms. I was always clear that I needed to work either in a small firm, meaning a handful of lawyers, and most of my career I worked on my own. I had a solo practice, and it worked really well for me because then I could flex around not only attending retreats, but when I became a Buddhist teacher in 2007, I spent most of my, if not all of my vacation time leading retreats. So it was always an active part of my life. And I've told you or I've written about before that when I was a young lawyer, I really felt I needed to keep these two worlds separate, and that somehow I felt that if I brought in the sensitivity of meditation, that it wouldn't serve my clients. I wouldn't be as zealous an advocate. And the way I talked about it to myself was I felt the other attorneys would be taking my lunch money.
Mhm.
So I had this, in effect, imaginary division between these two worlds, and trying to be a good lawyer and doing all the things that lawyers do, and at the same time having this rich meditation life. I'd been a meditator before I went to law school and was active. I generally averaged attending at least 4 retreats a year for most of my adult life. So I was very active on retreats and with working with teachers and all that as well. So a lot of different worlds colliding there.
Yeah, and I was my own kind of comment is, what I've found in actually working at a smaller firm now is that even though you're working on your own or with 4 or 5 people, the job can have just as much pressure because one of the advantages of a big law firm is that you get to divvy out some of the work as you get higher. This person do this person do that. Word processing, fix my document or whatever. But actually, and having friends that have worked in small law firms, or I have one of my best friends owns his own small law firm, and the pressures there is like you have to do everything yourself. You
Right.
don't have as many people to distribute the work. You've got to write the brief in your case and, reference check all the cases and make sure the formatting is right and all of the detail work that matters for that stuff.
Right.
So the pressures can still be, and as you speak about in your book, still be pretty immense, and it's I'm sure as a mediator too, and you can comment on this, you actually got to really see for yourself trying to resolve cases, a lot of the stresses that come about, in the attorney-client relationship and then the
Hmm.
attorney-attorney relationship.
Right. And that was really, as I got to be a more mature lawyer, that was really where I focused my attention. Even though I did all the legal work you're mentioning, I really began to prioritize the relationships, not only my relationship with my clients, but also the relationship with other lawyers. I practiced mostly in Northern California, and in Northern California, the Bay Area, it was large enough that there were many, many lawyers, but small enough that I would run into the same people. We'd have 2 or 3 cases a year together. So you were going to be seeing these people again. I was going to be seeing them again. So to really attend to the relationship, really stand behind my word, not get into any gray areas, not get into bluffing, any of that, really seemed to help not only my relationships with lawyers, but my cases. And ironically, when I began to more purposefully not separate my worlds, I found that everybody liked me better. I was more authentic as my hunch. So things worked well. And as a mediator, a lot of what I came to realize was how often the legal cases, the reason they're not resolving is because there's an underlying psychological tension that's not being addressed, meaning that people are getting triggered in a lot of their birth family patterns, and then they're digging in their heels because it's like mom and dad aren't seeing me, they don't love me,
Hmm.
and they're projecting it on the other side. So you have to be aware of some of these dynamics. I found as a mediator to really find that linchpin. I had one case where there was this big litigation, and it was some type of employment litigation, wrongful termination, and the person being terminated, who was terminated, had had a death in the family, which had put them into a tailspin, and the employer didn't know about, as I recall, didn't know about that death. So the employees stopped showing up promptly and doing their work promptly, so they fired them. And it was this big case and really involved. And what finally resolved it was I recommended that they do some type of an acknowledgement of the deceased family member, that they offer a small little scholarship at the school or put up a plaque, or I don't remember what it was, but there was something about acknowledging it, and that little gesture settled the case. So it was like once that was resolved, then they could come together financially and find what was fair and just for that case. So I
Yeah,
think it's important to include all this, is my point.
it's so interesting that you mentioned that, because the more I've opened myself up to this stuff, and my context is a little bit different because I'm doing corporate transactions that
Hmm.
hopefully don't end up in your hands as a litigator.
Hmm.
Um, but really seeing where people are coming from in terms of, sometimes, I have a client that gets on the phone and starts screaming and yelling and why isn't this happening, and you can see the anxiety build up,
Right,
and before, I think my tendency, and I see people around me do it, of like, oh, that person's an asshole, you
right,
know and I've started realizing more recently, like, no, that person's scared. Maybe
right,
he's not handling it as effectively and as consciously as possible, but the person's scared. Like, if this business goes under, what's going to happen to me? Um, Afraid of losing things, right? And that can get to,
hmm,
clinging and attachment in Buddhism, and what that how we behave as people because of that. But yeah, sort of removing that judgment and saying, okay, this person's scared. He just wants me to do the job and bring him comfort, and kind of flipping that around a little bit, because I began noticing when I think the guy is an asshole, I also suffer, because then I end up getting angry of like, oh, why is this
Hmm.
asshole asking me to do this? Right.
Right.
I'm not only making him the asshole, I'm making myself suffer as well. And
Hmm.
so it's been interesting when you talk about bringing the psychology, or bringing the deeper sort of knowledge of what even underlies our psychology as human beings, uh, aiding in the practice. So I kind of have seen that myself as well, which I
Yeah.
find interesting.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. To understand when the client's getting upset, the lawyer, the industry response is to numb emotion, to bring somebody into logic away from emotion. You see this in court, in trials. Somebody gets emotional on the stand, and the judge wants to take a break. Well, when I was litigating cases, if somebody was breaking down, I wanted them to stay because I want the jury to see it. It's real. I don't want to contain this. I don't want to pretend we don't have emotions. Let the jury see this has been really hard on them for these reasons. So to me, that's part of the message. But we're so trained to stay away from emotion and psychology, and we have this belief that if we just maintain a path of logic, all is going to be, great. I remember going to this as a lawyer, going to a mediation, and it turned out it was we mostly had large companies we were representing, so we had no representatives. They were all on the phone, and we're sitting around, the three attorneys and the mediator, and we started off, and I said, "Well, good. We can finally resolve this based on the facts and the law without getting into any emotion." And of course, everybody started laughing because it isn't how cases settled. There's a lot of inclusion of emotion and psychology, even though it's not expressed, it's implied. But even there among lawyers, we really don't settle it based just on logic and law. There's a lot more components that go into cases and resolution, even negotiation.
Yeah, no, it's very true. Emotion in the law office. It's funny. I actually found that in the last couple of years, when I would be on the phone with a colleague and I actually would express some of my suffering
Mhm.
as a lawyer and tell them, like, you know I actually started to find that it would open people up, and they're feeling the exact same way as I'm feeling, but it's never really spoken about. Or I actually had a partner at my firm, um, on Thursday in the office. We were talking about kind of what's important in life, and he said, I've had a lot of accomplishments in my 40-year legal career, and he's a great attorney. And he said, I would give them all up for one more Christmas with my family. And he's
Mm.
actually almost started to cry. And he's like, excuse me, I got to walk away before I embarrass myself. And he walked away. Um, but it's interesting to see the human side that sometimes or I've been afraid of showing, because I've got to make it. I've got to bill more hours. I
Right.
have to show how competent I am. I have to I can't admit if I don't know something, or if I need
Right.
guidance, or I need help, because someone might think I'm stupid. Like, I've seen this at the big law firm I worked at, where within 1 or 2 years of a junior associate starting, that other person was already labeled by mid-level associates as either good, bad, not good at their job, not, don't use this person, they stink, whatever. Like, right away, people make those judgments about you, and you realize that that's the case. And so it's like, uh harder to open up and be vulnerable.
Right.
It's just it's I've just seen it firsthand, and it um yeah. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, in the law, it's interesting how you work for a lawyer and the only feedback you probably will get is negative. You did this wrong, you got the wrong form, you got the wrong pleading, you're making the worst argument first. But when you do it well or you're competent, nobody says anything. So it's very hard to learn how to improve. And like you say, the younger attorneys are discouraged from coming in saying, I don't know what to do. I'm not sure how this works. And to get the advice of the older attorneys, their experience. So
Yeah,
I mean, I remember going into one of my first court appearances, and this was in the day, long before even cell phones. So we'd line up, queue up with the clerk and check in. And there was this lawyer in front of me who was really one of those pompous, I know it all, I'm the best kind of lawyer. And they may have been, but they really exuded that attitude. Well, they came up and they were just snapping at the clerk. I need my case called first. I've got to go to another case, or I've got a trial, or whatever it was, and just demanding all these things. And they turned and walked, and I watched the clerk take their file and put it on the bottom of the stack. And I realized the importance of all of these people, all of the support personnel, not only in the court, but in the law firm, you had to be aware of, because if you treated them like they were garbage, they were going to be getting back at you in those bureaucratic ways. So there's a lot to practicing law that's beyond your understanding or your ability to research or be clever. There's a lot
yeah,
of relational aspects to it too. I was always very clear that I worked as a lawyer. It wasn't my identity. And I say that because I remember being a young lawyer, and my then wife and I were out to dinner, and a lawyer I knew was in this bar restaurant. Clearly, had had a few too many drinks, walking around handing out his business card to what appeared to be single women. So basically, I'm a lawyer. You should want to date me,
yeah,
not because of who I am, but because of the role that I'm in. And so I realized that people really can rely on that and become, I am lawyer rather than I am human who works
yeah,
as a lawyer. Because now I don't practice law anymore. I haven't for 5 years.
hmm,
So, I'm still a lawyer, but I'm not a practicing lawyer.
right,
So it's a different world. But I think you're right. I think really what I see with the younger lawyers, the few I run into, is they are bringing more of their humanity in. They are insisting on work-life balance a lot more than my generation did. And so I think that's the way to really move forward, is people need to have a quality of life too. It
yeah,
can't just be about deadlines, and it's not just about a success on a case or trial.
yeah. I agree. I actually I started a little meditation group at my firm, so sometimes
Great.
some of the associates, we get together and we'll just do 10 minutes of follow the breath or count the breath, something very simple like that.
Great.
um and it's been great for building relationships and actually getting to know your colleagues, um a little bit better. I think it's fantastic, and
Hmm.
it's helped a lot. I actually wanted to kind of talk about your book that you wrote, Stress Reduction for Lawyers. I have it right here, and I read it. I thought it was great, and um I'll post the link in the below when I in the the comments when I post the video.
Great.
But yeah, I mean, you start up the book by just talking about, right, heavy workload, time pressure, high stakes work. And I experienced that firsthand when I was working, where there would be weeks where I would be up at I would be working until 5 in the morning for
Right.
3 straight days. And or another time where I was in the office and I didn't sleep for 36 hours. I was just up the whole entire time. Um, and then just long periods of time of just in front of a computer and hard, detail work, and the
Yeah.
pressure of doing it well and not sleeping, and I remember one instance where it was a public merger I was working on, and I think it was like 3 in the morning, and the associate I was working for made me look through the disclosure schedules that we had for the purchase agreement, and I had to go through every single footnote and make sure that the footnote had like two spaces between the number, was underlined, but the colon wasn't underlined. And then there were two spaces between the colon and the rest of the sentence. And it's 3 in the morning, and I'm like I'm about to just collapse. And there were many times where I finished the deal and I would get sick.
Yeah.
Like one time I ended up getting a viral infection in my eye and the flu.
Oof.
Another time when I had one of these transactions, I ended up getting thrush, which is a
Mhm.
fungal infection in your mouth that old people get in the hospital who have reduced immune systems.
Right.
And you know, so talk about heavy workload, time pressure, and then you're dealing with people, especially at these big firms, where this is their identity, and you're
Right.
expected to be on their wavelength and on their timeline.
Right.
And so you've got to take that on, and that's very difficult to do. And frankly, I couldn't do it. And I have to admit, I don't have attention deficit disorder, but I started relying on things like Adderall, right?
Right.
Too much coffee,
Yep.
um, other substances to get me to force me into concentrating when I couldn't anymore. Because not only are you tired, but the amount of detail that you have to pick up on while
Right.
you're exhausted is just so tremendous. And you talk about this at the beginning of your book, and it's so true.
Right.
And it's difficult. Comments.
Yeah, and as you're saying, what this leads to is using substances, legal or illegal, to try to keep your attention sharp and then relax when you're not on. So I can remember doing some big project. Of course, there was no an immediate deadline and all that kind of business. And I remember sitting there, it was, I don't know, 11 or 12 at night, and I was sitting at my dining room table working on this, and I had a cup of, stimulant, and I had a glass of wine, and I was sort of alternating drinking one and then the other
Yeah.
because I was trying to kind of stay sharp, but I didn't want to get jangly.
Yeah.
So, here I was trying to manage this, and I looked at myself and like, what am I doing? It's like 3 in the morning, and I'm, sipping caffeine and then a little sip of wine. And anyway, I realized I ended up going to bed. I realized not this is absurd. I'm getting too crazy. But there is that is part of the system. And I know when I was first a young lawyer in the 80s, there was a huge problem with cocaine, both in law school and in law
Yeah.
practice. And there were a lot of lawyers that were using that as a stimulant.
Yeah.
I've never used it, so I'm, sort of going on word of mouth. But my understanding is it is a stimulant.
It could
People
be like
can
an Adderall,
focus.
basically, or
Yeah,
or or a Red Bull. It's like you're doing it not to have fun, but to actually stay awake and stay
right.
sharp and get some dopamine running in your brain so that you could actually, I mean, really, it's mitigating suffering, And I think where
Yeah,
I'd
it's
like to
exactly what it is.
eventually, kind of go with the conversation, and kind of we can get into it now, is just the kind of two things you mentioned in your book, right? Because we're at the end of the day, all this stuff, heavy workload, time pressure, high stakes work, it kind of goes to the Buddhist notion of suffering,
Yeah,
right? We're
absolutely.
suffering, our clients are suffering.
Hmm.
And how do we learn what the root of this suffering is, how to deal with this suffering better, both in ourselves and other people,
Yeah,
such that we can find balance and maybe joy in even some of these tough times, right? Or
right.
this strenuous workload. Um, and I think the possibility of that is something that I've recently opened up to, and two practices you mentioned in your book, right, which are it's the breath counting or the breath following,
Hmm.
and the heart opening meditations.
Yeah.
And it's like, can you talk about why you chose those for lawyers to open the heart and to follow the breath?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's not a surprise that the legal profession, as I experienced it, really was very much a head only business or industry. And there were a lot of folks who not only were they not in touch with their hearts, but they saw that as a sign of weakness, as something that was going to interfere with their effectiveness as a lawyer. So there was a real turn away from that. And what I realized, just what you're saying, was the stress load and the way that stress is managed in the legal profession was just very unhealthy. And what it comes down to is that on some level, the lawyers and the law firms are watching the money. We want to make the most money doing this work. We want to get the most for our clients. We want to bill the most. And for lawyers working in the big firms, I want to make partner. I want to be on that track because I want to share in the rewards. And we're willing to make all these sacrifices for that to happen. So there has to be that shift I mentioned earlier into a work-life balance. We have to realize, running myself at this rate is only going to affect my health the way that you saw, and it can get worse. You can get into things with high blood pressure, stroke. There's a whole bunch of things, heart attacks that can happen. And I knew some lawyers who were older than I was who dropped dead at a relatively young age, and it was just the stress. They were terribly out of shape. They consumed massive amounts of caffeine and were always just on. They were just the type A's. So there really is a quality of life question. There's also a quality of health. We really need to balance this. I mean, does it really matter that your case is ahead of some deadline? If it's unrealistic, then you need to balance those things. So I'd introduce these aspects because the breath awareness practice, being aware of breath, is a foundational meditation in virtually all religions and even in spiritual communities. The American Indians had a variety of breath meditations and other indigenous people. So it's something that's very core to humans. And because breath really means life to us, it's something we're always doing, so it's easy to turn into and pay attention to. And also things like if we are meditating and we're aware of our breath, trying to really take good quality breaths, we're going to relax more because we're going to be oxygenated, we're going to be more relaxed, more at ease. So I thought that was an important way to go. Plus, it's something, breath awareness meditation, we can do it right now. We can do it while we're in a deposition. We can do it while we're writing a brief. So it's something that you can cross over into all aspects of your life and your work. And the hard aspects were really pretty clear that this is an area the legal profession doesn't value. And yet it's something we really need because that's where a lot of the quality of life comes from, is our connectivity. So you and I are connecting now, and we're connecting in a way that includes heart. So there's a juiciness to it. It's more satisfying to both of us, and your listener, your watcher is also going to be more resonant because that's a quality of our conversation and interaction. So really the two main heart qualities that I focused on, one is equanimity. Equanimity is really about accepting the truth of the moment. So it's really, this is the truth. Right now, what our interaction, this is where we are. So if I'm wanting to be somewhere else, I wish this interview was over and I could be doing something more enjoyable, then we're not here. We're in the future. Or I'm going in the past. We're talking about some case that didn't work out well for me. So I'm reminiscing, but I'm stuck in the past. And most people, they find from brain research, only spend about 10% of their energy in the present moment. yet this is where everything is happening. So there's an attention aspect that the breath awareness helps. Again, with the equanimity, we're accepting what's here. And then the karuna is compassion when there is suffering, our suffering or others' suffering, then we can more readily be with it. And by being with it authentically, it lets that natural resonance of our heart come in to where there's a tenderness that comes in supporting. And that's one of the things with clients. Clients will, when you first meet them, will tell you their story of, whoa, all these things happened. It was all awful. And I want I want help. I want to be vindicated, all that. And a lot of it is they just want to be listened to. They want you to get what they've gone through. And this is where the mirroring really helps too, in repeating back to them, wow, that sounds horrible. What was that like for you? So asking questions that aren't legal questions, but it lets the person unpack their experience. Otherwise, they're going to keep looping back to it. And that's one thing I found as a mediator was really letting people tell their stories, talk about the impact. That was essential for them to get out. Otherwise, again, it just keeps looping where every time they talk, they come back to it. So and so really hurt my feelings, and they just keep looping around there. So I just thought these were ones that were doable and would make a big difference. If somebody were to apply any one of them, it would be a big help.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say two things that I noticed for myself is one, in terms of staying in the moment, there is a tendency that I notice in myself, and I venture to guess it applies to others, but you're working on a document, right? You've got five other things to do after that document. Um, you don't want to be working all night. So you're on the document, or I'm on the document, and I notice that I'm on the document and there's this small amount of anxiety bubbling in my body because actually I'm not just in the moment with the word I'm reading. It's like I'm trying to get somewhere with it, like get it done,
Mhm.
get it over with so I can do the next thing so that I don't have to be here until, you know, 10 o'clock at night because I have a preference for, going home or doing something else.
Right,
And beginning to notice how that thought operation is actually causing me suffering in the present moment. It's causing me anxiety and it's causing me not to be here. So, what I noticed with the breath meditation is just, one, just settle in and let go of the desire to be anywhere else, right? If I've got to be
right.
here till 10 o'clock, that's okay. Let that hold on the preferences, let that go a little bit
Yeah,
and stay with the word I'm reading. And then all of a sudden, right away, my comprehension goes up. What I notice goes up.
hmm,
My just ability to be with the work and not have that stress, anxiety, tension. Uh, it's very helpful. And then in terms of the heart-based practices, I've just noticed, and I think when you open up to the heart, it seems to me it's much easier to take the perspective of the other person and to
right,
see where the other person's coming from. And, for example, if I feel like, man, I already got so much workload on me, and my partner just calls me, asks me to do more, or I wanted the partner to help me, but the partner was a little bit short with me. Okay, yeah, but this guy just might have gotten screamed at by his client. He's afraid of his other partners because if he doesn't bring in enough business, maybe he'll get kicked out. Like there might be something going on with him or her,
right.
and it's sort of it lessens that self-reflective, nature that's in us about turning whatever is happening back on myself and what it means for me, you
Hmm.
know? And if I let go of that a little bit, or if I learn to let go of that a little bit and open the heart, then I'm able to just be just, if it's going to be a long night, if it's going to kind of suck, it's like, okay, I can just be with it. And there's less suffering there for myself and for others. And I think that um that is it's very been important for me to learn. And I think it's one of the things that sort of goes a little bit unnoticed. And that's what kind of I wanted to bring in your deeper meditation practice to this as well. Um, and because it's one of the things I learned, because I just attended my first Zen retreat,
Hmm.
and I had never sat for 10 hours in a day or 11 hours, and I've done some longer sits before, but not like that.
Hmm.
And it got to a point on the second day where I was in so much pain that my body was like literally like I was on the cushion shaking, you know? But then something happened where it's like just surrendered and stopped fighting it, and a relaxation came over my body, and a calmness that I never felt before. And it was like, wait a second, if I can just stay with this suffering and not fight it, then it changes.
Right.
And that really affected my law practice, because when I've been up for 13 hours and I'm sitting there and I'm like, oh my God, I'm so exhausted. Like, that's when that suffering comes up, and
Hmm.
how I deal with that. And how everyone as attorneys deal with it, because it affects how we interact with other people and our lives. So that kind of brings me to wanting to know about your background as a meditator and your sort of deeper meditation practice, and um, wanting to get into that with you. So
Hmm.
if you could share that, that would be amazing.
Yeah, yeah. And the first thing I'll say, echoing what you've said, is as humans, the majority of our suffering comes from resistance to what is. And that's what we find. That's what particularly the Zen retreats really revealed to us, is if we can just accept this is the suffering, this is the pain, then it lessens the whole situation, because most of our suffering is we're trying to resist and not feel that pain in this moment. So we run out of tactics, and that's really the benefit. With deeper meditation practice, as you mentioned, um, part of my teaching is really going into, particularly around spiritual awakening, what in the Zen tradition we call Kensho, which is awakening to one's true nature. That's a big part of my teaching, along with the heart practices. And I think there's something that's really important in that too. We're in a point in history where there's a lot more people who are waking up than ever before. So it's an important time. And I think with things like our planetary crisis, this is a time we need more people who are awake to their deeper nature and learning to function from that deeper nature. It's just essential. So that's a lot of what I do with my teaching. I've completed the formal koan study in the Rinzai tradition, so I've done 500 or 600 koans, and I'm at the very nearing the end of Zen Dharma transmission. So I'll be a fully independent Zen teacher sometime early next year, and be anchoring my own sub lineage within the overall lineage. So it's an important part of the process to me. It's really where I emphasize my teaching now in retreats. Like I'm starting a retreat, I'm teaching starting next Friday on exploring cessation. Cessation in the Theravadan Buddhist, which is the practices of the Buddha, Cessation is awakening. There's four stages of awakening, and cessation is the critical experience of that. Cessation is an experience where all materiality and mentality cease. So it's like a dreamless sleep, but it's uh, basically the center of the universe. It's the center of the source. We call the source the absolute in the Zen tradition. And cessation is the center, is the core of the absolute. So it's a profound experience, life altering experience to make sustained contact with cessation. And one of the unique things in my teaching, for whatever reason, is I'm able to guide people and they're able to follow along when I'm describing what's happening in our field in this moment. They're able to be there with me. And so people are moving in and experiencing the absolute and having experiences. About 90% of my students are having awakening experiences in the guided meditations I lead. So it's a unique contribution that somehow is manifesting through me, which I tell people I'm not doing anything. There's no technique. It's just the way the absolute's functioning in this particular body.
Yeah, I mean, could you? It's interesting. Can you talk about what, for our viewers who don't know as much, like what a deeper meditation practice is, and just briefly, like what awakening is, or what cessation is, and what a direct experience is. You know, like what a
Mm-hmm.
direct. You know, I don't think a lot of people that I know who aren't familiar have the possibility in their mind that they can have a direct experience of what their true nature is, or even
Mm-hmm.
what a direct experience is. So,
Yeah.
you know, if you could kind of give a little bit of a rundown of a deeper meditation practice and what direct experience means and what true nature means, that I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, the direct experience really is an experience that's non-conceptual. So, for example, I can say, here's this glass with this liquid in it. What is it? And you can give me lots of ideas about what it is. And then I can say, well, this is water. And if we want to know what water is non-conceptually, if we're conceptual, we're going to say, well, it's wet, it's clear, it's cool, it's refreshing, all these different things. But to really know what water is, we have to taste it. And then we don't need concept. We know from direct experience. And that's meditatively what we're orienting towards is direct experience of the absolute, of the source. One of the ways we do it in the Zen tradition, we use koans, which are spiritual paradoxes. They're an exchange between a master and student, typically from the Tang dynasty from about the 6 to 900s in China, where there were a lot of amazing Chan masters in those days, and some of the exchanges were captured, and we use them as koans. We use them to penetrate into the mind, the consciousness of the participants, to where we can have an awakening. We can realize the mind that's being pointed to for ourselves in this moment. So that's really a lot of the benefit of that practice. Another meditation I teach is called shikantaza, or just sitting. And I teach it with three stages. The first stage is unity of body mind. Second stage is unity of inside outside. And the third is opening to the vastness, to the absolute. And with that, people can have sustained experience with the source. I also have some guided meditations on my YouTube channel, guiding people into absolute meditation. It's called Peace and Stillness Meditation. So there's a variety of ways one can make contact. Awakening is when one steps out of their psychology, their personhood, and where the absolute realizes itself. So I don't have an awakening experience. The personality is not part of that experience. Consciousness and awareness are where the awakening happens. And it wakes up to the reality of how things actually are. So we learn to have these experiences. I have a growing number of students that are having Kensho experiences, awakening experiences. For me, there needs to be three components. One, we need to have an experience of absence of self, where the normal self isn't present. I say to you, who are you? The normal reference, we self-reference, well, I've got this name, I've got this education, I have this profession, family, etc. And that's normally the way we know ourselves. When we're in absence of self, you don't have an answer. I don't know who I am. It's a blankness, a question mark. And we stay with that, and that becomes an important opening into awakening. There needs to be the recognition of the absolute. This is my true identity. That's part of the awakening. And the third is love, a deep unity experience. Everything is one, everything is the same fabric of oneness, including me. So all three components need to be present for me to confirm an awakening in a student, a Kensho. But after Kensho, a lot of the students' work then becomes, there's times when they're steeping in the vastness of the absolute and times when they're in the personality. And when they're in the personality, it's looking at that behavior, the triggers, the reactivity, and then trying to see what still fits with the awakening versus what's outdated. What do I need to drop because it's no longer relevant? It's no longer true. And so it's an upgrading of the personality, the functioning, all that. And it's an ongoing process. The level of realization continues. There's always more realization, there's always more awakeness, and there's always more integration and reconciliation of personal material. And those seem to go on forever. I haven't had an end in my own practice, and I don't see it in students. So I think that's sort of encapsulates that world a bit.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for that. Yeah, I mean, I guess a simple way I'd describe it is like, a lot of religions. I'm actually Jewish, but we talk about we call the absolute the Ein Sof, right? The ayin, or the
Hmm.
nothingness, or Christians have their own view, and Buddhists as well,
Yeah,
putting aside the differences, but they point to one thing that's sort of similar, and it's like the possibility of, wait a second, like I can actually directly experience and verify that for myself. I
right.
mean, that just that recognition of that possibility is quite mind blowing, right? It's something that can shift. It shifted for me a
Yeah.
lot. What was happening in my life, because I remember actually sitting one time in when I was working at Big Law, and I really had like an existential crisis that led me to a lot of this stuff. And I remember sitting there, and I was telling my friend who I was working with, like, everybody around here is acting like they're never going to die and that this will continue forever. And
Right.
I'm gonna sit behind this computer, I'm gonna type documents, and then I'm gonna be dead. And I don't know who I am. I don't know what I am. I felt this pull, like I don't know what any of this stuff is.
Yeah.
And that kind of really brings me to my next topic. It is a very natural lead in, because I've been doing a lot of thinking about, you've got this experience, right, of the absolute. You experience the source of the whole universe, right? But then you still went back to being a lawyer, where, oh, I got to catch that typo. I've got to pay attention to this detail. I've got to make my case with the judge. I've got to do all the procedural nitty gritty things well. And those things might appear at first to be sort of opposite, the absolute source of the universe. And now I'm sitting here, you know, proofreading my document, or doing something else, or checking the formatting, or whatever it is, or researching, or revising a draft. And how can our work and our attention to detail and some of these things, how can that inform uh, the integration of awakening into real life? And are those things that I just mentioned really so diametrically opposed, or is there something unifying about them? And,
Hmm.
and I guess the follow-up to that question is like, how can one's realization of one's true nature, right? How can that influence our law practice and the legal industry
Hmm.
in general?
Yeah, the first answer is that if the awakening is deep enough, and meaning is it sustained? People can have a 1 minute kensho, they can have a multi-month kensho. So the longer it lasts, we call it the deeper it is, the more transformative it is. But in the deeper side of that experience is we realize that everything is the absolute. Everything is an expression of the absolute. The absolute itself is without condition. It's not born, it doesn't decay or die. It's always been in existence, it always will be. And yet our world is conditioned. Everything has a birth, a decay, and death. So it's conditioned world. But we realize the conditioned world is equally an expression of the absolute. So whether I'm meditating or whether I'm proofing a document, it's still the function of the absolute. So once I begin to break down the division, because initially people will hold it, yes, I'm meditating and I'm have this relationship with the source, and then I put it down and I go to work. Well, you need to break down that division. It doesn't exist, it's only conceptual. So that helps a lot automatically. And then it's also prioritizing things like your health, time off, relationships, family. So it's really giving an equal attention, I suppose, to those areas that are normally neglected. And so we have to be willing to sacrifice some money, maybe some, I know when I was a sole practitioner, there was always a great pressure to accept whatever cases my clients offered because I didn't want them to start looking for somebody else to say, well, if you can't take it, if you're too busy, we'll find another attorney to give some of this business to. So there is a lot of pressure in it, but you've got to prioritize your health, your family, et cetera, too. So that's part of it is the balancing. But it's all here. Once you realize everything you're doing is an expression of the absolute, it takes a lot of the pressure off to only do this or only do that.
Yeah, it seemed to me that, well, one in to talk to your point on work-life balance, and that was one of the questions I wanted to ask you, was about how can an awakening sort of recontextualize work and career. Um, I would say it's something for me. It can go to identity of basically I can take this seriously, but also realize on the other hand, to use the Zen term, that it's empty, and so there's this like full commitment but also an ability to be more flexible, right? And
Hmm.
and that seems to again reduce suffering.
Yeah.
Um, and so I guess I wanted to ask you about that. How can an awakening can help contextualize our life and our career in the context of our life and of existence? And do we necessarily have to stop taking it seriously, right? Which
Hmm.
I would like to hear your response to that.
Well, with awakening, part of what happens is the personal sense of self, the allegiance, the dedication to that softens. So we don't take ourselves as seriously that I'm functioning in this role, but lawyer, when I'm sound asleep, I'm not a lawyer, I'm a human sleeping. So it's understanding that it's just a function, whether you're delivering milk or you're writing a legal brief, it's just a function that you perform. So that takes it away from it being this the be all and end all. And also with the softening of the self, then also if you make a mistake, it isn't that you're a horrible person. It's you're a person who's made an error. And what I would tell younger lawyers when I was more senior was it isn't being a lawyer isn't getting everything perfect, but it's learning how to fix any mistake you make. That's the professional. It's not expecting superhuman performance, but you learn enough to learn, okay, I can borrow from column B over here and go to column A and I can fix this. I made a misstep. So that's a lot of it. And a lot of it, again, is also as we soften our allegiance to our sense of self, is we're able to connect with others more. I don't need you to mirror me in any particular way. I can be here. I don't know who I am. So I don't know, I don't have an expectation of you mirroring a specific thing back to me. So we can have a more authentic interaction.
Mm.
And I'm happy to see you exactly as you are. And what you present is what I see and what I am engaging with. So I don't have an image of you. I don't have something a self-image of you that I'm trying to mirror or confirm for you. I'm just being with you in this moment. So it softens all of that by having the self. It puts things into the proper balance when we realize the self is a psychological construction. It's a conceptual construction based on history. It isn't real independently. When we're in a coma in the hospital, there's no personality, there's no sense of self. So it isn't enduring. It's only based on our, basically all the movie clips we put together of our life, we now string together into some story about who we are.
Mm.
And it's just, it isn't ultimately true. It's true in a relative way or in a conceptual way.
Yeah. It's, two things come to mind, if you don't mind me sharing, um, is, on the Zen retreat I was at, part of that retreat is also working. So,
Mhm.
you're meditating for 10 hours a day, but then I'm also sweeping the floors and chopping down trees, and doing all sorts of stuff. And the one thing I realized about non-self that I was able to integrate into my legal career is that if I give myself completely to a task, in other words, if I throw myself into it, sort of like a concentration meditation,
Mhm.
then the part of the psychology that goes, well, I don't want to be doing this. I wish I were something else. I wish my life would have gone this way. I wish I could have another career. All that stuff, it quiets down because the 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 that process kind of you start to see through that. I started to see through
Mhm.
that a little bit. Um
Yeah.
and and that all I need to do is just, hey, throw myself into my meditation, my task, the way I do my meditation, right?
Mhm.
And uh that brings me actually to my question I was going to ask you about concentration meditation and about jhanas, because it's sort of a similar principle where you concentrate on your breath and there's this separation between me and the breath, right? And then you talk about in your book Demystifying Awakening, where this sort of miraculous thing happens where there's no more self looking at the breath anymore. It's just the breath itself, right? With no sense of self watching it. And I guess if you could talk a little bit about that, and then the possibility of transitioning that into the tasks that is it possible to transition that into the tasks that you do in your job, such that, hey, I'm now going to throw myself into writing or doing whatever else I have to do without
Right.
feeling that sense of separation between it that might cause some suffering for us.
Right. Yeah, yeah, that's a great example, the working on retreat. when I used to do retreats, I used to volunteer to clean the bathrooms because for one, it triggered me. I was holding this attitude, well, I'm a lawyer, I've got this degree in this work. And in fact, I was often the lawyer for the Zen centers I was on retreat with.
Mhm.
So I'm the Roshi's lawyer and the board's lawyer, and here I am cleaning bathrooms. But it was perfect. There was a great humility in it about doing it, and I realized that I really wanted to be clean and sterile for everyone. I wanted to offer this gift to everyone that they could count on a clean, sterile bathroom. And it became a really great teaching for me, and where I was on a teacher's retreat 10 years ago and I volunteered to clean the bathrooms. None of the teachers wanted to do that. And I was like, yeah, absolutely, I'll do this. So some of it is really being willing to challenge your sense of who you are. Like for you to chop down a tree, well, I've got this education, I make this money, these people depend on me for these huge deals, and here I am cutting down a tree, that they could have an unskilled, uneducated person do. So there can be lots of ways we're asserting the self, and that's part of what the work process on retreat is it's softening that belief is I'm this special person. We are very special and unique, but we are because we're expressions of the absolute rather than we're mired in our personality. So with the jhana practice, it's a conditioned practice as long as the meditation there are three levels to concentration meditation. Every meditation has the first two: momentary concentration, where's your awareness in this moment? And then when we start to stay with the meditative object, the focus of our meditation, in the example you gave, the breath, when we're intimate with the breath without much separation, then it moves into the second level, which is access concentration. And there we begin to get some goodies. We have joy and bliss arising, so we can stay with the breath easier, we can go more deeply. And if we go deeply enough in access concentration, which is the second level, then in concentration meditation practices, there's a potential level, third level called absorption or jhana. And that's where the sense of self drops completely, thought stops completely, and we're completely merged in whatever our meditative object is. So in case of the breath, we're completely merged into the breath in a very specific way, and without a sense of self. And the jhana practice is a purification of mind practice. By putting down who we are, by letting ourselves merge, by letting thoughts stop, we have this revolutionary experience. I can remember the first time doing this practice with my teacher 20, 25 years ago, and being able to function without any thought going on at all. I could conduct myself through my day. I couldn't come up with language. That was harder, but I could absolutely eat and take care of things and do my work and whatever on retreat. So it helps with this practice. This is a temporary practice. And then to me, awakening is a permanent experience where consciousness changes in a way. If it's a deep enough kensho, it doesn't change back. And that's why it's so revolutionary, is it isn't just conditioned on being on retreat or meditating well. It's something that changes from the inside out. Actually, both jhana practice does and awakening does.
Hmm. It's just it's so interesting. I think it kind of goes to I love the seeing the uh I think to talk about like suffering. I'm kind of struggling a little bit for words here, but the how the sense of self and or seeing through it or dropping through it can help us to be more at peace with what's going on. um
Hmm.
and I actually, if you don't mind, this morning I read a passage from your most recent book, Trust and Awakening, and I kind of wanted to bring it up because it was basically about about our preferences. And I want to do this and I want to do that. I don't like this. I don't like that. I think it's on like one of the beginning, and
Hmm.
it really it really struck me. I kind of almost want to see if I can find it here, if you don't mind.
Yeah, it may be the first stanza
Yeah,
even.
I think it's yes, okay. Here we go. It's with no preferences, and it says preferences derive from our internal self-talk of I like this and I don't like that. Our preferences support our customary self-identity. Only when we drop preferences, drop like and dislike, can we see the great way before us. In Buddhism, we discuss three defilements. Defilements are core inclinations that drive the sense of self, making it appear real to us. The three defilements, which everyone has, are desire, aversion, and delusion. Desire is a longing for things. We believe these things will make us feel safe and whole. Conversely, aversion is a dislike for things. We believe pushing bad things away from us will keep only good ones close. Finally, delusion is a misperception and misunderstanding of reality. We believe the customary self-identity is something real and solid. By surrendering desire and aversion, we allow what is unfolding in our life to be here while viewing it as exactly right for this moment. We can be with the natural flow of reality. And that really struck me for personal reasons. And I think I emailed you about this because before I became a lawyer, I was a professional baseball player, and I didn't make
Uh,
it to the major leagues. I also wanted to become an opera singer, and law was kind of a fallback for me. And so I really struggled for years and years with, I don't really want to do this. I don't really want to be this.
mhm.
Um, I really don't want to be this. I really don't want to be this. And a lot of things that come, and I kind of wrote down some notes, like, and I've mentioned this before about, you know, some request comes in at work and, oh, these guys are so annoying. I don't want to do this. Or I just got an email. Now I've got to review a document on the weekend. Oh my God, my weekend is ruined. This is horrible. I just want to get this over with. I see people, even really good attorneys, get lost in this all the time. And sort of this kind of little bit of cycle of negativity. And I began doing it, but then recently I sort of realized that this line of thinking is suffering, and it goes to what you wrote about in the book. It's like when I'm sitting there and I'm getting angry and feeling self-righteous. Oh, that I can't believe this guy did that. It's like, why can't I just drop that? It's like there's something about that anger that's reinforcing Adam,
Mhm.
this sense of me,
Yep.
which is why it's so hard to catch it and drop it, because it kind of feels like you talk a little bit in your book Demystifying Awakening about absence of self experiences, or that are a little bit disorienting, and it's like when I drop it, it can be a little bit of like, oh, like what's going on here, sort of a thing.
Right.
And so I began realizing, in terms of talking about the fruit of awakening and meditation, is, oh, this is suffering, right? And a lot of the Buddhism is about, hey, there's suffering and then there's a cure to suffering, and let me show you how. And it's like, wait a second, why, instead of running away from being a lawyer, why I can, how about I just accept it and go with it and open up my heart and make the most of it, and kind of sort of put that person that had dreams about his life, and
Mhm.
fantasies about how it would go. You know what? I can put that away now. Or I'm going to have to do work on the weekend. It just came in. I'm going to have to spend 4 hours doing this. You know what? I can either get myself all worked up about it, or I can just say, you know what? I'm going to drop that. I'm going to let it go, and I'm just going to be with it. And
Mhm.
I started realizing, wait a second, if I do that, I'm a better lawyer, I'm happier, I'm a better husband and father, I'm a better friend. And you know what? Maybe I can bring some positive change and influence in my profession, by embodying some of these principles. And I'm not always perfect, but it's something that I'm really, really working on. And I feel like being a lawyer has almost become its own form of spiritual practice because it is so difficult, because there is so much stress. It gives me a window, as you said before, into my triggers. What's triggering me? When I get a little bit tired, what triggers me? Because actually that's an opportunity to see, when I'm a little bit tired because I have less resistance, where my triggers really are. Right?
Right.
Those are opportunities. Um, and I wanted to share that with you, my personal experience. I hope that's okay.
Of
Because
course.
I really would love to, I don't get much of a chance actually to personally share this with somebody like yourself, who not only is a meditation teacher and an advanced meditator, but also is a lawyer, and could actually, maybe for me selfishly, give me a little bit perspective, but hopefully some other people, on what I'm going through as an attorney, and where a deep spiritual practice can again help us in our careers, not as a I'm going to make it somewhere, but in finding more truth about ourselves and about reality as people.
Yeah.
So after that long, as we say in Jewish or in Yiddish, spiel, I leave it up to you.
Yeah. No, I think your point's really well taken that this is one of the benefits that law practice affords is it is stressful, it is demanding, it is exhausting. So, and this is part of the way the traditional Zen retreats are designed also. They're designed to be hard, so you do have physical pain. So at some point you have to just simply accept it. And it teaches you to accept difficulty and pain, and like you're saying, when you're tired, you can see more of your triggers because you can accept the fact, you get an email on Friday at the end of the day, sorry, this has to be done by Monday, and you can spend an hour pitching a fit, and then you have the paper to work on. Or you can just say, oh, that sucks. I'll have to rearrange my weekend. How am I going to do that? So right away, you're minimizing the resistance, you're minimizing the suffering by accepting this is the reality, this is truth.
Yeah. And sorry to interrupt you, but my weekend.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. So, and that's the thing is it, and also including the fact that this is a part of lawyering. You are going to have your personal life disrupted. It's part of the way the industry works. So thinking it's going to be different is what causes suffering too.
Yeah.
So as we learn to accept these things, and again, for me, my driver on what I do is that I wish to be of service. And as a teacher, I've taken the Bodhisattva vows, which includes the first line is that I take the vow to save all sentient beings. That means I take the vow to see that all beings are fully awakened. So that's a vow I have, and that's my life work. It's to be of service. And of course, there's no way that I can save all sentient beings. And there's also a perspective from the absolute. They're already saved. Everyone's already fully awake. They just don't know it. So both I have the aspiration and the aspiration is done. And that's where I work.
That's beautiful. That's well said. And where can the recognition of our oneness as human beings, how can that affect a difficult law practice or a difficult
Hmm.
job, and
Yeah,
opening the heart up to what that means, to what love actually is, to what
right.
how, if you could say a few words on that.
Well, normally love, if we have, you, let's say you and I are friends, we've known each other, we have a certain amount of love, we both have an expectation of what that's going to be in the relationship. We both have a sense of what I'm going to give, what I'm going to get. And if we feel there's an imbalance, I'm giving less than I'm giving more than I'm getting, then that's going to be a rub. We feel we have a social contract, and one of us is not fulfilling that, even though it's never been discussed. So a lot of it is learning to break down these expectations, to recognize them for what we want. And a lot of it comes down to we want to be mirrored in certain ways. I want myself to be reflected, not the full self. I don't want the lazy part. I don't want the incompetent part reflected. I want the competent, smart, handsome, successful, talented. I want that.
Mm,
And when people do it, we love them, we like them, we think they're so brilliant. And when they don't, when they pick up on things we don't want to be reminded of, then we don't like them so much. We don't want to be in relationship. So again, this is the softening of the self. We don't need that kind of mirroring as much, so we can more authentically be here. And it's like you said before, it's really orienting to the present moment. The more we're here, the less we're in the future. I want it different. I want to spend this time with my family tomorrow. I don't want to be working. Well, I am going to be working. I have to do this. There's no way around it. This emergency arose. So a lot of it is accepting things as they are, softening our sense of self, being willing to bring our heart into things. And a lot of it, Adam, is we have to be willing to abide in not knowing. That's where a lot of the secret is. I don't know exactly how to be. I don't know how to be with Adam. I don't know exactly how to do this work the right way, because then we have the beginner's mind. Then we have every possibility. If we're the experienced expert, we don't have much flexibility of mind. You see, where we have the experience, we narrow the interaction to just a little bit of movement. So a lot of that's, again, coming back to being simple, coming back to being open, to not knowing, to being willing to also look foolish. For me to say to you, I don't know the answer to that. I don't have that experience.
mm,
That's important to include.
yeah, yeah, and I guess to wrap up here, would you, based on your spiritual journey and as a lawyer, for the past I don't know, 30, 40 years, I guess, would you care to share any advice to both young and senior lawyers about um, how the profession can, what would awakened lawyering look like, and what could some people do uh, to take some steps towards that?
I think the biggest thing would be to recognize that as lawyers, our primary duty is the search for truth. What is the truth? What is the true dynamic of this situation? That's really what we want to further. So orienting to that helps a lot. Also, being looser about getting the result I want. So, like in a mediation, you come in and there are people with opposing viewpoints, and you're going to try to find some middle ground. It means everybody has to change their expectation. And that's a lot of it, is having flexibility to realize, what's really the driving forces, what really is resolution, what do people need, because as lawyers we assume it's all financial, and a lot of it's not, a lot of it's human. So including the humanity, I think, is really important. And the other thing I'd say, legal profession, is to schedule and take more time off, because having downtime away from it, you're going to give up some of your professional growth, money, but you're going to have a higher quality of life. You're going to improve your relationships. You won't get a chance to have this time with your kids again. They're not going to be this age again. You'll turn around and they'll be grown and gone. And same with the partner or spouse or significant other that needs attention, those relationships. And those relationships should not be taken for granted. It's a place you get juice, you get seen, you get held, you do the opposite, or you offer that too, then you need to nurture all this. So it's really being willing to be human in addition to functioning as a lawyer.
Well, incredibly well said. And Stephen, I really, really appreciate this conversation. I think a lot of people are going to benefit from it. I know I'm going to share it with the lawyers that I know at my firm. And I think it's amazing work you're doing. I recommend everyone read Stephen's books. He's also done, multiple incredible podcasts as well, that are on YouTube, that you should check out. And Stephen, thank you very much for being with me here this morning.
My
It was an
pleasure.
honor, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Adam. Be well.